Hello, this is Eric Neal, your exercise physiologist and nutritionist, and I'm bringing you part one of a three-part series of Advanced Nutrition and Exercise 601, Calories In, Calories Out. Our learning objectives are calories in, calories out, starting off with calories in, followed by calories out, which is our total daily energy expenditure. And those are made up of thermic effect of food, exercise activity thermogenesis, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, basal metabolic rate, and we'll conclude with adaptive thermogenesis. Is a calorie really a calorie? Yes, it is. However, it is misleading. A breakdown for calories in, calories out. So to start off, I want to ensure that you're aware, to have weight loss, you must be in an energy deficit. That means you need to be burning more calories than what you are consuming. To maintain weight, you would need to burn the same amount as what you are consuming. Calories in. Calories in, we can pretty much pinpoint and make it very precise if we follow everything that I go over here on this slide. So the way that we're going to determine this to start off is you got to read your labels. You want to make sure that you understand that there could be more than one serving in something that you're eating. If you have a bag of chips, it might have 3 or 4 servings rather than just one. So that's one thing you have to start off with. You also have to realize that sometimes fiber, which our insoluble fibers do not have calories, soluble fibers, about half of them do. And I will break down on another slide later about what you need to do as far as calories go, what you need to reduce or not. Sometimes foods don't have a label, and particularly a lot of times your meats or your produce do not have a label. And if you need to look that up, I provided a couple resources for you through research nutrient databases. fdc.nal.usda.gov and nutritiondata.self.com are two databases that you can use. Also, it's very important that you measure your foods. Do not just assume what you're eating makes up whatever portion sizes you're looking for. Okay, make sure you have liquid and solid measuring cups, because you don't want to measure a liquid in a solid measuring or the opposite. Then also you'll want to have food scales and rounded teaspoons and tablespoons on hand. If you're trying to measure peanut butter or almond butter or something like that, it's much easier to measure that using food scales or rounded teaspoon or tablespoon rather than a regular teaspoon or tablespoon. You would just measure it in grams or ounces on the food scale, or just level it off on that rounded teaspoon or tablespoon. And then when it comes to foods like meats, the food scales are pretty much the only way you're going to be able to go, measuring that in ounces or grams. And then to finish everything off, it's really important that you're tracking everything. So if you're doing everything I've listed above, you don't want to fall into the trap of not tracking it and then just eating as much as you want throughout the day and not knowing where you stand. So myfitnesspal.com is a great resource that you can use for tracking. I find it to be very convenient. It's much easier than the old days where we just wrote stuff down on paper. Something I love about MyFitnessPal, you can take a barcode and scan that. You just want to make sure that it's accurate. I've noticed sometimes when I've scanned some foods using the barcode that everything didn't pop up exactly right. And then the same thing goes, like if you just type in the food, if somebody else has already put it in there, same deal. You can save yourself some time, however, make sure that it's correct. And if the barcode doesn't work, if someone hasn't already put the food in, you can manually enter it yourself. And you can create recipes, create meal plans. That will save you a lot of time. Maybe you're eating a certain food that has 5 or 6, 7 different ingredients in it, and rather than just manually entering in every ingredient by itself, if you have a recipe created, you can just simply choose that recipe rather than entering each one of those foods one at a time. And then the same thing if you have certain meal plans set up, you can add in an actual meal and save time rather than putting in 3 or 4 different recipes. That covers calories in. So if you follow all of those steps, you should be 99 to 100% within accuracy. Calories out, however, different story. It is a lot harder to gauge. So our calories out is our total daily energy expenditure. So the total daily energy expenditure is the sum of the thermic effect of food, exercise activity thermogenesis, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and the basal metabolic rate. And these are also known as calories out. So the thermic effect of food is the energy cost of chewing, swallowing, digesting, absorbing, and storing food, while the exercise activity thermogenesis is the metabolic cost from the activities of exercise. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis encompasses energy expenditure of occupation, leisure, basic activities of daily living, and unconscious spontaneous activity such as fidgeting. And this one has the greatest variance. And the basal metabolic rate is the energetic cost of the biological processes required for survival at rest. So below, I have a diagram I want to go over here. So on the left, you get your components of daily energy expenditure. So we look at thermic effect of food. On average, 8 to 15% of what you eat is the calories will be burned through the thermic effect of food. Now, there will be some cases, and I'll show you later on a spreadsheet that I put together, where the total daily energy expenditure could go above 15 or it could go below 8%. But generally speaking, 8 to 15% is a good numbers to provide for where most people are going to fall. Okay, so if they were to have a certain number of calories, basically you would just multiply that 8 to 15% by the number of calories. So that's how these numbers were put in the second, third, and fourth columns to the end. Let me reword that. The third, fourth, and fifth columns on the right side. The next one is the exercise activity thermogenesis. So most people, 15 to 30% of the calories that they burn will end up coming through the exercise activity. Same thing as far as to get how many calories, you just multiply 15 to 30% by the total number of calories. Then you have your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. As I said before, this one's got the most variance. Your sedentary individuals down around 15%, while you got other people that might have a rougher job, more manual labor, or fidget more. It might be up to 50% or even more. And then your basal metabolic rate is going to make up about 60 to 70%. Something that I want to include about the basal metabolic rate is that's going to stay the same every day pretty much. Now, over a very long period of time, we might see changes based on whether you've had muscle gain or your body's just functioning better. But just day-to-day basis, these calories are going to stay the same. However, the percentage could change. If the top three there of thermic effect of food, exercise activity thermogenesis, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis end up increasing, then that is going to decrease the basal metabolic rate. Or if they decrease, then you're going to be increasing the percentage for the basal metabolic rate. Thermic effect of food, this is going to be a power-packed slide, okay? That is the energy cost of chewing, swallowing, digesting, absorbing, and storing food. So if you're trying to do a diet-induced thermogenesis, then you might want to consider these numbers I'm about to present. Westerterp determined that 20 to 30% of protein, 5 to 10% of carbohydrates, 0 to 3% of fat, and 10 to 30% of alcohol are burned through the thermic effect of food, while Jacquier found 25 to 35% protein, 6 to 8% carbohydrate, and 2 to 3% fat are burned through the thermic effect of food, and Halt and Hu found 20 to 35% protein, 5 to 15% carbohydrate, and they claim it is subject to debate for fat when it comes to the thermic effect of food. So some additional things I want to include when it comes to protein, according to Atchison, whey protein has a higher thermic effect of food than casein and soy. And for the carbohydrates, we have to take into consideration not just about thermic effect of food, but if food's not digested, if we want to consider removing from how many calories that we've consumed when we're figuring out calories in versus calories out. The thermic effect of soluble fiber that is fermented is probably the same as the other carbohydrates, but half of the soluble fiber and all of the insoluble fiber is not digested. Therefore, they should not count as calories. The soluble fibers that are digested are fermented to short-chain fatty acids that feed the gut microbiota in the colon. So getting fiber from fruits and vegetables, very important because these are your prebiotics, and the prebiotics are the food for your probiotics that you're getting from foods like Greek yogurt or kombucha, anything that's got the live cultures in it that enhance the gut microbiota. Okay. Now what I want to do is I want to give you an example going back to the labels, okay? So we're going to choose a food that has 10 grams of carbohydrates, 0 grams of protein, 0 grams of fat. So if the label says 40 calories on that, and out of those 10 carbohydrates, we've got 2 grams of insoluble fiber and 1 gram of soluble fiber, then we are going to remove 8 calories for the insoluble fiber, and we are going to remove 2 calories for the soluble fiber. 2 calories because we're looking at keeping half of them and getting rid of half of them from that 1 carbohydrate of 4 calories there. So if we see 40 calories listed on that label, we're going to need to go ahead and reduce 10 calories. If we see 30 calories listed, then we know that they have already removed the calories coming from fiber from that label. Okay? Then I want to go ahead and add in, according to Seaton, there is a variability in the thermic effect of fat based on the molecular structure, as the medium-chain triglycerides produce a greater thermic effect than the long-chain triglycerides at 12 versus 4%. Also, to add to that, if you were breaking down different fats coming from sources like olive oil or sunflower oil or those different types of fats, you're going to find that the olive oil is going to have a better thermic effect based off of uncoupling of proteins. So basically, your white fat is going to turn to brown fat, and we're going to cover that process in more detail later. What I would like to go ahead and add to this slide is some of the research that I found. A study conducted at Sonoma College compared the thermic effect of whole foods versus processed foods of meals comparable in terms of protein at 15 to 20%, carbohydrate 40 to 50%, and fat 33 to 39%. The average energy expenditure for the whole food group was 19.9% compared to 10.7% for processed foods group. That came from Food and Nutrition. That particular article changed my thought process on how I view wheat bread versus white bread. In the past, I had felt there wasn't much of a difference because when I looked at the amount of fiber that was in it and looked at the glycemic effect, I just felt like, well, there's not as much as a difference as I would want to make this change in my diet. And till I read this article and saw how much of a difference we're looking at with the thermic effect of food. So now I'm choosing to go the route of consuming whole wheat rather than white bread whenever I'm eating bread. Another study, it's called is a calorie, really a calorie, the metabolic advantage of low carbohydrate diets, Journal of International Society of Sports Nutrition. It says that a combination of the thermic effect of food and the hormonal changes associated with low carbohydrate and high protein diet make it a metabolic advantage and proves that a calorie is misleading. This kind of goes back to one of the earlier slides when I asked the question, is a calorie really a calorie? Okay, so the hormonal changes associated with a low carbohydrate diet include a reduction in the circulating levels of insulin along with the increased levels of glucagon. So insulin is an anabolic hormone. It can lead to muscle gain and fat gain, while the glucagon is a catabolic hormone and it helps with fat burning. These hormones also have to do with your stabilization of blood glucose. Whenever blood glucose gets low, then glucagons get released. Whenever the blood glucose gets high, then insulin gets released. So the circulating levels of insulin along with increased levels of glucagons leading to an activation of phosphoenolpyruvate carboxykinase, fructose 1,6-biphosphatase, and glucose 6-phosphatase, an inhibition of pyruvate kinase 6-phosphofructo 1 kinase and hexokinase, favoring gluconeogenesis over glycolysis. Gluconeogenesis is an energy-consuming process as 6 moles of ATP are consumed for the synthesis of 1 mole of glucose from pyruvate or lactate. The transformation of gluconeogenic amino acids increases turnover of body proteins and the energy-dependent processes of maintaining the turnover of proteins, including synthesis, folding, targeting, regulatory process, and protein breakdown, have an overall cost to body energy homeostasis that is significantly higher than previously appreciated. Then to add more about protein, in a systematic review by Helms, it suggested that 2.3 to 3.1 grams of protein per kilogram of fat-free mass was appropriate for lean resistance-trained athletes in the hypocaloric conditions. Following a diet this rich in protein and during a hypocaloric period of dieting will increase induced thermogenesis from the 8 to 15% to a slightly higher range. And this is from a systematic review of dietary protein during caloric restriction in resistance-trained lean athletes, a case for higher intakes, from the International Journal of Sports Nutrition and Exercise Metabolism. So these numbers go a little bit higher than previously taught, 1.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. However, we do have to take into consideration this is for lean resistance-trained athletes when they are on a low-calorie diet. Getting back to is a calorie a calorie? A calorie is a calorie violates the second law of thermodynamics. This is from Sheldon Cooper's hero, Dr. Richard Feynman, from the Nutrition Journal. And it's shown that there were values taken by Jacquier, determined on 2,000 calorie diet based on consumption of a 55% carbohydrate, 30% fat, and 15% protein yielded 1,848 calories. And if those 55% carbohydrates were lowered to 21%, substituting the carbohydrates removed with fat and protein equally, it would yield 1,748 calories. So 100 calories burned for free, basically, just by a slight change in the diet. Now, the fat substituting for the carbohydrate isn't much of a difference. In actuality, it actually decreases the thermogenesis slightly, but the protein replacing the carbohydrate increases significantly. And that's how we got 100 additional calories removed, basically. So instead of 1848, now it's down to 1748. I also wanted to add that although it is not from any peer-reviewed literature when it came to the fiber, I did find on fiberfacts.org, it claimed that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration estimates that fibers fermented by bacteria provide about 2 calories per gram. Insoluble fibers travel to the intestine with very little change. Instead of being digested, insoluble fibers increase bulk, soften stool, and shorten transit time through the gastrointestinal tract. Because these fibers are not digested at all, the FDA estimates that insoluble fibers do not contribute to any calories. And the last one I want to provide is by Robbie Durand of Muscular Development, a new research on old fat, MCTs. It may be a good idea to cycle usage of MCT oils, as the study has shown diminishing effects of medium chain triglyceride oils, showing metabolic rate was higher on day 7, but not day 14, during a 28-day study, and should be taken in small amounts to avoid gastrointestinal disturbances. Positive effects include thermogenesis and satiety for weight management, but nothing proven for performance enhancement. However, in my opinion, since MCTs are used for fuel rather than stored, they can be helpful to endurance athletes for sparing carbohydrates for long duration activities. Okay, I've got a breakdown here of the thermos effect of food. I used Westerterp's high end for each particular food, along with their macronutrient. And I also included the low end for each meal. So if we take a look at meal number 1, it is 42% protein, 6% carbohydrate, 52% fat. So it's quite a high fat meal coming from the salmon. And then the broccoli it's a very thermogenic meal. You see 35.8% of it, based on the high end, is burned through the thermic effect of food. So 16.8% on a ketogenic like diet here. On the high end, 10.8% on the low end. And then we'll look at the next one. The next one, I've got a peanut butter sandwich along with some cauliflower. This one being at 18% protein, 39% carbohydrate, 43% fat. So this meal is on the higher end of the fat also, but higher carbohydrate and lesser protein. And it came out to 17% on the high end, 12.8% on the low end. The third meal is more of what most bodybuilders type of meal would be consumed of. We've got the beef tenderloin, sweet potato, some light butter, green beans, and pineapples. And speaking of the pineapples, that's what you should eat first in this meal because it's got digestive enzymes, bromelain, particularly for pineapples, that help you absorb your nutrients. So it should be eaten first. And this one is 28% protein, 39% carbohydrate, and 33% fat, and 18.2% of this one on the high end, 12.7% on the low end. And then for the chocolate cake, this one was the worst one, 9% on the high end, 4.8% on the low end. So if these meals were definitely on that high end of lesser terps calculations, then the first three meals could go as high as slightly above the 15% range, and they fall within the 8 to 15% if we're looking at the low range. And the cake for the last meal is within the 8 to 15% on the high end and falls below the 8 to 15% calculating on the low end. Now you might wonder, how did I get all these numbers? So I'm going to go ahead and share that with you now. So I multiplied the protein grams of, so I got 1.2 basically, 4 calories times 30% to get the thermic effect of food calories. And then I just simply divided that by the total protein calories to get that percentage. For the fat, same process, but rather than 1.2, it was 0.27. So I took 9 calories per gram times 3%. Then I divided the fat calories, the thermic effect calories from fat by the total fat calories. For the carbohydrates, I subtracted the number of insoluble fiber grams from the carbohydrates and half of the soluble fiber grams from the carbohydrates. I also take that same number of insoluble and soluble fibers, deducted from the carbohydrates, and multiplied by 4 to get the calories of fiber not digested. Then I multiplied the number of carbohydrates after the deduction by 0.4, so 4 calories times 10% to get the thermic effect of food calories. Then I added the thermic effect of food calories to the calories of fiber not digested. I took the sum of the thermic effect of food and the fiber not digested and divided by the total calories of carbohydrates. Add up fiber not digested and the thermic effect of food from all macronutrients and divide by total calories to determine the percentage of the thermic effect of food. And the insoluble fiber totals that I got came from prebottom.com, and macronutrient data is from fdc.nal.usda.gov. For exercise activity thermogenesis, what that is, it's any form of exercise or movement of the body that uses energy. It makes up 15 to 30% of our total daily energy expenditure. And the caloric expenditure, that's determined by the amount of oxygen consumed in milliliters per kilogram of body weight multiplied by the duration in minutes multiplied by 5 kilocalories. Okay? So example I provided is an 80 kilogram person training at 20 milliliters per kilogram for 30 minutes. You might wonder, well, how do I know how many milliliters per kilogram? That can be determined by doing a VO2 max test where a metabolic cart is hooked up to a member, and you can find out how many milliliters you're consuming at different heart rates. So this formula that I have here, it's not set up in the scientifically correct way, but I do have everything set up correctly as far as what you're multiplying and dividing by. So 80 kilograms times 20 milliliters times 5 calories times 30 minutes. You divide that by 1,000, you're going to end up getting 240 calories. We have to convert calories to liters, so that's why we've got the 1,000 being divided. Then we've got your metabolic equivalents, so 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute is 1 met. And you can also do the math, and you'll see this on treadmills, basically how they're going to get the number of calories that you are burning. There's a walking formula and there's a running formula as we see listed here. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So what affects that? Thermogenics is one. They increase metabolism. Some examples include caffeine, green tea, capsaicin, and turmeric. Low calorie intake. Over time, that reduces the non-exercise activity thermogenesis through homeostasis by making the body believe it only needs the restricted amount of calories it is consuming. That's why we don't want to starve ourselves. That's why we want to do things more intermittently. Maybe go through the route of doing things like fasting and then eating a normal amount of calories on the other days. That way we can have a lower amount of calories like throughout the week, yet not have a chronic underfeeding. Exercise, so that your non-exercise activity thermogenesis is increased through excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. The amount of your daily activity, so examples that would include work or fidgeting, any type of leisure activity. If you're doing manual labor, you're definitely going to be burning more calories than you would at an office job. Brown adipose tissue activation, so fasting, ketogenic diets, cold showers, high-intensity interval training, consuming turmeric are some ways of converting white adipose tissue to brown adipose tissue to burn fat thermogenically. So NEAT comprises of 15% of the total daily energy expenditure in sedentary individuals and perhaps 50% or more in highly active individuals. NEAT can vary as much as 2,000 calories between individuals of the same size. So this is the one that has the most variance. It's based off of so many factors that I just previously mentioned. So I've got a lot of great information to add about non-exercise activity thermogenesis and the things that affect that. So what I found, and this one is from article, Caffeine Acutely Activates 5-adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase and increases insulin-dependent glucose transport in rat skeletal muscles by Igawa in the magazine Metabolic. Caffeine increases the central nervous system and increases energy metabolism. Caffeine stimulates muscle glucose transport in the absence of insulin. increases GLUT4 messenger RNA or protein expression in cell cultures, and enhances fatty acid metabolism in muscle. So if you've ever heard of the saying that fat is beta oxidized by caffeine when carbohydrate restricted, this is basically proving that. Then green tea, that can increase thermogenesis and fat oxidation through caffeine and catechins. The catechins are believed to influence energy through inhibition of catechol-0-methyltransferase. This enzyme is responsible for degradation of norepinephrine and epinephrine, causing a continuous stimulation of adrenergic receptors occurring with the result of increased energy expenditure and fat oxidation. So here's the take-home point there, okay? So I said that this enzyme is being inhibited, okay? And this enzyme is responsible for the degradation of norepinephrine and epinephrine, which causes a continuous stimulation of adrenergic receptors, okay? So since we are inhibiting an enzyme that degrades that, we are allowing these adrenergic receptors to continue to work for a longer period of time. So that is one good reason to consume green tea, for that continued thermogenic effect. And this comes from a review of natural stimulant and non-stimulant thermogenic agents from phytotherapy research. Green tea also helps lower cholesterol. Its extract enhances the health of the endothelium, which decreases resistance to blood flow and reduces blood pressure, from the Journal of Nutrition. Another article from a review of natural stimulant and non-stimulant thermogenic aids, phytotherapy research, is capsaicin has the potential to increase energy expenditure and decrease body fat by enhancing catabolic processes in adipose tissue through activation vanilloid receptors. Activation of these receptors are believed to occur through nitric oxide synthase and induction of calcium fluxes, and as a consequence, catecholamines are counteracted, making it act as a non-stimulant thermogenic. Why is that important? Well, some people, it would not be a good idea for them to have a catecholamines to be increased to increase their sympathetic nervous system, because maybe they have high blood pressure or high resting heart rate, and they need to prevent that. So by having a non-stimulant that can still produce that effect is what makes this important. So ways of getting capsaicin in your diet: you can put hot sauce on your foods, add the crushed red peppers to your pizza. Two studies from the University of Connecticut and Texas Medical Branch in Galveston show the metabolic system works in times of nutrient excess and scarcity. The first study fed participants a leucine essential amino acid carbohydrate supplement, which stimulates mTOR pathway and suppresses adenosine monophosphate kinase system. The second put participants on a reduced calorie diet, 20% fewer calories, with a high amount of protein intake, approximately 1.5 grams per kilogram, which suppressed the mTOR pathway and protein synthesis. So despite the increased protein, the mTOR pathway was suppressed on that 20% less calorie diet, while it was stimulated on the normal calorie diet, which had carbohydrate and leucine amino acid. So that is reason to not go too low on the calories, because we do not want to have a negative impact and suppress mTOR. Then we have A study by Hackney recorded EPOC for 72 hours following eccentric loaded resistance training with the result of a 9% increase of energy expenditure for 550 calories. That's more than 180 additional calories per day from this eccentric loaded training. That's training where you're focusing on getting the negative. So if you're going on the downward phase of a bench press, that would be the negative. The upward phase of the lat pull down would be the negative. So if you're focusing on that, you should have a better EPOC. Also, got a lot of stuff here when it comes to the browning of fats. Study found that a high-fat keto diet was associated with a larger mitochondria and increased levels of mitochondrial proteins and uncoupling proteins in the brown adipose tissue. It was found that the brown adipocytes from the keto diet contained a greater number of droplets, even though total lipid amount in the brown adipose tissue wasn't different. More numerous smaller droplets also mean larger available surface for faster lipolysis. The increased cyclic adenosine monophosphate levels in the tissue suggested a role for increased sympathetic stimulation of the tissue, which would cause an increased lipolysis and agree with the smaller droplets observed. Additionally, keto diet treated mice had reduced plasma leptin levels, but the mice were not hyperphagic, suggesting increased leptin sensitivity or changes in other appetite regulating hormones. This is from a ketogenic diet increases brown adipose tissue, mitochondrial proteins, and uncoupling protein levels in mice. From IUB MB Life. Another study in regards to brown adipose tissue. Low temperature exposure induces browning of bone marrow stem cell derived adipocytes in vitro. This is from nature.com scientific reports. Study states that the increase in all markers of a browning process observed at lower temperatures is remarkable, and it includes a marked increase in all aspects of mitochondrial metabolism examined. This was accompanied by increased leptin content compared to standard temperature conditions, indicating enhanced rate of fat metabolism that can contribute to enhanced release of leptin and its nuclear translocation. It has been previously shown conversion of thyroxine to triiodothyroxine by enzyme 5-monodeiodinase, which binds to the nucleus, is essential in ensuring uncoupling proteins 1 is transcribed in hypothermic rats. The browning process induced with low temperature was associated with leptin translocation to the nucleus of uncoupling proteins 1 adipocytes, indicating a possible role for leptin in browning process. The nuclear presence of leptin receptors also has been observed in a different cellular context, suggesting a possible new regulatory role for leptin, a hypothesis consistent with its reported stimulatory effect on fatty acid oxidation. Okay, here's another study when it comes to adipocytes. It's called Intermittent Fasting Promotes Adipose Thermogenesis and Metabolic Homeostasis via VEGF mediated alternative activation of macrophagy cell, and it was by Cell Research. Study found that intermittent fasting led to an increase in beige adipocytes, thereby elevating energy expenditure, particularly during energy intake. And last, this is a muscle irisin response to aerobic versus high-intensity interval training in overweight female adolescents from diabetology and metabolic syndrome. And what they found was irisin induces browning of white adipose tissue, resulting in increased thermogenesis. Study found that high-intensity interval training increased irisin levels, but aerobic training did not. on to basal metabolic rate. That is the energetic cost of the biological processes required for survival at rest and is measured in an overnight fasted state lying supine at complete rest in the post-absorptive state, which would be the condition in which the gastrointestinal tract is empty of nutrients and the body stores must supply required energy. So if we're getting a calculation of the BMR, there are different ways of doing that. You've got your direct calorimetry, which is measured by heat. That is your most accurate way. However, it's also your most expensive method, and it is also very difficult to perform. Then you have your indirect calorimetry, which would be a measurement of gas exchange. So basically, measuring the amount of oxygen through a metabolic cart is how we measure a metabolic rate through indirect calorimetry. And then we have your estimates by equation. So examples here would include the Harris-Benedict equation for men and women, along with the Cunningham equation for both men and women. So you might wonder what affects the BMR. Well, for one, lean body mass does. Increases in metabolism by requiring more energy needs to maintain the muscle mass. It's also going to be your best indicator for your basal metabolic rate. However, it's not the only indicator. And then sleep. Getting enough sleep improves the metabolism by preventing cortisol and ghrelin from elevating too high. So you don't want the cortisol to be elevated chronically. That causes a lot of problems like abdominal obesity, muscle loss. Ghrelin is the hormone that makes you hungry. So we'll make sure that we're getting enough sleep so those aren't elevated. And then during your sleep, you're also producing growth hormone and testosterone and leptin. And leptin is that hormone that prevents you from getting hungry. Also, low calorie intake. So over time, this is going to reduce your metabolic rate through homeostasis by making the body believe it only needs the restricted amount of calories that it is consuming. So I have different methods that I recommend people to use, such as throwing in like cheat days or diet breaks. We're going to talk about that stuff more in depth in the next course, diets. But doing things like intermittent fasting, there's a lot of different techniques that you can do so that you're not consuming calories on a consistent basis that are too low. So by just kind of mixing it up, prevents that homeostasis from happening, which should lead you to much better weight management by preventing your metabolism from dropping. Something I'd like to share before I move on, sleep has decreased by 15% since the 1950s, and 16% of Americans get less than 6 hours of sleep per night. Interfering with sleep decreases exercise capacity and threatens metabolic health, which leads to obesity. And that is from Current Sports Medicine Reports. Okay, so earlier I said that fat-free mass is the best indicator of the basal metabolic rate, but now let me go ahead and add in some additional stuff now. So muscle, it only makes up about 13 kilocalories per kilogram per day of your resting energy expenditure. The heart, the brain, the kidneys, and the liver make up 70 to 80% of the resting energy expenditure. So if you take a look at this chart below, you're going to see that 4% of your energy expenditure is going to come from how much fat that you have. 16% is coming from your bones, skin, intestines, and glands. 22% from muscle. 21% from the liver. 22% from the brain. 9% from the heart, and 8% from the kidneys. Okay, so if you are gaining muscle mass, you are going to have an increase in metabolism, but that's not the only factor. You want to make sure that other areas of your body are staying healthy as well, and working most effectively so that you are burning as many calories as you should be. Because if say that your liver's not properly functioning, then more than likely 21% of your calories aren't going to end up getting burned due to the liver. It could be less. So having healthy function from the rest of the body is also going to contribute to a superior metabolism. Excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. That is the elevated oxygen consumption above your pre-exercise resting VO2 that typically remains elevated 1 to 2 hours with usual moderate intensity exercise. But as we spoke of earlier, it could remain elevated up to 72 hours. So they found that 550 calories burned over a 72-hour period from a workout that focused on eccentric load. Okay, so high volume resistance training focusing on the eccentric load and hypertrophy are methods to increase the EPOC. So another study that I would like to go ahead and add here is they compared supersets to traditional weightlifting. They found that the supersets were completed in less time and greater energy expenditure than traditional weightlifting because of the EPOC. Taking short rest periods between sets creates a fat-burning environment due to increased circulating levels of growth hormone, catecholamines, and also increased energy expenditure. I love using those style of workouts for that reason. I also love to feel the pump. And so, when you're doing workouts like supersets or drop sets, that type of stuff, I mean, you definitely, you feel the pump and you get your workouts done pretty fast and definitely into that fat burning zone. And you get a lot of micro tears going on, which is a good thing. That heals over a couple days. So a lot of people associate lactic acid with micro tears, and these types of workouts do build up lactic acid. However, that's not what is contributing to that delayed onset muscle soreness that a lot of people feel. It's actually those micro tears that's happening during this style of training. And so when you find yourself in workouts that get you pretty sore, good chances are that you're probably also going through a pretty good EPOC too. So you're burning additional calories while you're at rest, which is very helpful. And then we've got respiratory quotient, and that is the ratio of carbon dioxide produced to oxygen consumed. If your respiratory quotient is 0.7, you are burning nothing but fat. If it is 1.0, you are burning nothing but carbohydrates. And then the ratio at rest for most people is about 0.82. And that would be 60% fat, 40% carbohydrates. Now you might wonder, well, what can I do to change this? So one thing you can do, if you're eating a diet that's high in fat and low in carbohydrate, there is a good chance at rest and during your workout that you're going to rely on fat as your fuel more than carbohydrate. But let's just throw that aside, okay? Let's assume that you are on a normal diet. So I want to explain the process of how you would get up to 100% fat or close to that. So what ends up happening is when you start to do an activity that is of light activity, like walking 3 miles an hour, 3% grade on a treadmill, what begins to happen is both your carbon dioxide output and your oxygen consumption are both going to increase when this happens. but the oxygen consumption increases more than the carbon dioxide output. So that makes the ratio for your respiratory quotient go down. If you begin to increase your intensity, so maybe you increase the speed to 4 miles an hour and increase the incline to 5%, it's going to start requiring a little bit more effort. And when that happens, you are going to continue to increase the amount of oxygen that you consume and burn more calories. However, the amount of carbon dioxide that you are putting out is going to go up more than the amount of oxygen that you are consuming, which will increase your ratio for your respiratory quotient. So when you start to do something like run pretty fast, then you're going to start breathing so hard, and eventually what's going to happen is carbohydrates are going to take over because your oxygen consumption is going to match your carbon dioxide output. Okay, so that's why if you are doing a long duration training at high intensity, it's very important to have carbohydrates in your system to use as fuel, because if you don't, your body can't use fat at that intensity. It's going to go through a process called gluconeogenesis, where your body is going to take protein and convert it to carbohydrates. And if you do not consume extra protein to make up for this, there's a good chance that you will lose muscle. So that's why it is so important to consume carbohydrates if you're doing long duration, high intensity activity. Our last subject is adaptive thermogenesis. So changes to the energy expenditure are not always completely accounted for by changes in lean mass and fat mass. In context of hypocaloric diets, adaptive thermogenesis is a term used to describe the gray area where losses in metabolic tissue cannot simply explain reduced energy expenditure. In lean and obese subjects, maintaining a drop of over 10% of the total body weight results in a 20 to 25% decrease in the total daily energy expenditure. Adaptive thermogenesis is at a 10 to 15% drop in the total daily energy expenditure beyond what is predicted by losses of lean mass and fat mass as a result of losing at least 10% of the total body weight. In weight-reduced subjects, the vast majority, 85 to 90%, of the adaptive thermogenesis is due to non-resting energy expenditure. It is speculated this is caused by increased sympathetic drive and decreased thyroid activity. So people, they will start fidgeting less. They're going to have less thermic effective food because they're eating less. They're not going to burn as many calories when they're exercising because they're restricted in their foods. So all of these reasons are reasons that are going to contribute to this. The literature has been examined for 11 studies to see if adaptive thermogenesis exists for overfeeding, but there was no evidence found beyond the theoretical cost of increased body size and thermogenic effective food were found. A study that I want to share with you is comparing a group consuming 890 calories, a group with a 25% reduction in calories, and a group with a 12.5% reduction in calories combined with 12% increase in physical activity expenditure. The results show less of a decrease in resting metabolic rate for the combination group and the largest decrease for the 890 calorie group. So Metabolic rate stays the best for the people that were combining exercise and diet, the worst for the 890 calorie group. The results also show the difference was minimal at around 25 calories difference from the 25% reduction group, and around 50 calories difference for the 890 calorie group. The results also show less of a decrease in total energy expenditure for the combination group, but the most decrease from the 25% caloric reduction group. This difference in total energy expenditure had a much greater effect between the groups, as the 25% caloric reduction group had a reduction in total energy expenditure by over 300 calories compared to the combination group reduction, a very minimal change or nothing at all. So this article by Kevin Hall, Predicting Metabolic Adaptation, Body Weight Change and Energy Intake in Humans, from the American Journal of Physiology, Endocrinology, and Metabolism, proves that it would be a better idea to combine training through exercise and physical activity and diet together over a close to starvation diet of 890 calories or a 25% reduction. Okay. Last, so you saw this demonstration earlier about the energy deficit versus the energy balance. So you have adaptive responses in energy expenditure during energy restriction. Over the course of a weight loss phase, total daily energy expenditure will decrease as a consequence of declines in resting energy expenditure. Non-exercise activity thermogenesis and exercise activity thermogenesis, and the thermic effect of feeding. This results in a lessening of the energy deficit, which can cause plateaus in weight loss if energy intake matches the new level of energy output. Plateaus may only be overcome by a further reduction in energy intake or an increase in activity levels. So what can end up happening is you could be like working really, really hard, dieting really, really hard, and eventually you're just going to hit a plateau because you just can't keep decreasing and adding more because of the impact of what you're going to do to your body based on what we're going to talk about here in Figure 2. Okay, so this leads me to give you an invite to a future course called Diets. And we're going to talk about things like intermittent fasting and diet breaks and how that can definitely help prevent these types of plateaus. And that's all I'm going to say about that for now, because I do not want to ruin it for you on the diets course that I hope that you will join. When we take a look at Figure 2, we're looking at before energy restriction and after energy restriction. So you can see there's an increased hunger, a decreased energy expenditure. The ghrelin levels are rising, while the PYY and insulin and leptin are decreasing. Your thyroid and testosterone and leptin are decreasing. Total daily energy expenditure, thermic effect of food, resting energy expenditure, exercise activity thermogenesis, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, body mass and fat-free mass all going down while the cortisol levels are going up. So the adaptive responses in the endocrine system during energy restriction. In response to energy restriction, the resulting energy deficit and corresponding weight loss causes an increase in the drive to eat and reduced energy expenditure, collectively making the continuation of weight loss more challenging. Changes in the circulating levels of orexigenic and anorexigenic hormones communicate a nutrient deprivation to the brain, causing stimulation of appetite and a decrease in feelings of satiation. Furthermore, energy restriction causes a shift in circulating levels of hormones involved with the regulation of thermogenesis and energy expenditure. Changes in these hormones indicate a physiological shift directed at correcting the state of energy deprivation and favoring weight regain. Exercise activity thermogenesis, fat-free mass, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, peptide YY, and resting energy expenditure. Okay, we do not want to be decreasing these things. Okay, so I want to talk about homeostasis in the last lecture. This is part of what I'm talking about with the homeostasis. We want to avoid a negative impact on our body from homeostasis kicking in because we have been increasing our exercise at too high of a level and decreasing our calories at too low of a level, and eventually just getting to this level where we just can't get any better, and there's just no room to add more exercise or decrease more calories. So we got to think about things in more of a smart method. So I hope that you will join me for lecture 2 coming up in the near future. Thank you for joining me today.